We'll do fine. Mr. Vice Chair?
Good morning. How are you?
I am well, sir. Yourself?
Good, good.
Very good. Mr. Pigram, how are you this morning? We'll do fine.
Good morning. Very well. Thank you. Sorry, I was double muted.
Double muted. Good morning, Chairwoman El Badri.
Can you hear me
That was faint. Were you speaking into the mic?
Hello?
Yes, that I heard very well.
Awesome. All right. I think I'm connected.
Okay. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Ms. Taylor, good morning. We're not hearing you. I did not hear that even after you unmuted. Can you try again?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Sarah, can you hear me?
Mr. Campbell, was that you?
Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah.
I just wanted to say before we get started, and I'll say it again during the meeting, you are doing a fantastic job.
Oh, thank you so much. It's definitely been a learning curve, so I appreciate that a lot.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you. I'm not gonna lie, I feel like before every meeting, I'm like, okay, just like let's make sure we got this today.
It's clear that you spend time, being prepared and getting ready for it.
Yeah.
Good job.
And also, what were you saying?
I said you're really up on what's going on. Good job.
Trying.
Good morning, Ms. Rump. I believe you're muted. We see you. I think you're muted, Ms. Rump.
Yes, I am. And I'm trying to change this, my virtual screen.
Oh, okay.
I am not at a Pine Hills Community Council meeting.
No, but we'd be fine if you were. Dr. Stevens, how are you this morning?
Good morning. Good morning. You know what? Actually, I have for Ms. Rump. I think if you look down the bottom of your screen along the left-hand side, there's something that says stop video with an arrow. Do you see that?
Wait a minute. Stop video. Okay,
yeah,
stop
if you
video.
See the arrow to the right of that, you'll actually see there's some other options like choose virtual background, whatever.
Yeah. Oh, okay. It's hidden.
Exactly.
You're right. There we go. Thank you.
Sure thing.
It is hidden. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Choose virtual background. None. Thank you.
And Good morning, Marianne, by the way. I'm sorry.
Good morning.
I jumped right into my tutorial there, and I didn't actually, I don't think I said good morning to you.
All get comfortable with our backgrounds. I have a new background today that my colleague Leilani Bayonga made for me.
Very nice.
Which I am debuting here for CAC meeting. I see that it is 9:30, Madam Chairwoman. We are streaming live to YouTube, so you may begin the meeting whenever you are ready.
So thank you so much, Marianne.
Hello, this is the courtesy call to Alton. This is the office of Dr. Cindy Stefani, RD. We are calling you to remind.
There we go.
All right. Okay. Well, I think we're going to get started now. I'd like to welcome everyone to this virtual MetroPlan CAC meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. My name is Sarah Al-Badri, and I'll be chairing the meeting today. We also have a team of folks working hard to ensure this meeting runs smoothly, so thank you all. Today's meeting was advertised on MetroPlan Orlando's website and social media, as well as through targeted emails. Florida Sunshine Law requires a quorum to be physically present in a room for a government meeting. Governor DeSantis suspended this requirement in an executive order, allowing government boards to conduct business using virtual meetings. However, that order expired on October 31st, so this meeting is held in workshop format. Staff will further explain what this means in just a moment. Now, it's actually time for our Pledge of Allegiance. Today, I'll ask our Vice Chair, Jeffrey Campbell, to lead us in the pledge. Everyone, please remain on mute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with
justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell and Ms. Salas. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. I know I do a good job with that.
That's perfect. Thank you. At today's meeting, we'll keep microphones muted unless you've been recognized to speak, and we'll use the raise hands feature to participate in discussion. There's going to be two public comment points in the meeting. Members of the public who want to speak will use the raise hands feature on the Zoom screen. If attending by phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand and request to be recognized. When you're called, your microphone will be temporarily unmuted by staff, and we'll ask you to state your name and contact information for the record. We've also accepted comments by email and phone message before the meeting. The guidelines for public comment are posted at metroplanorlando.org/virtual meetings. Public comments received before the meeting will be read by staff at the conclusion of the meeting. We want this and all future online meetings to be accessible to all. Participants may join by computer, tablet, or phone. If you need accommodations to participate in the future, please contact MetroPlan Orlando. All right, so we are going to get started with some announcements. At the February 10th MetroPlan, or I just have some updates. MetroPlan, at the February 10th MetroPlan Orlando board meeting, obviously I shared our comments from our previous meeting, including the concerns from some of our members about FDOT's TIP amendment involving the I-4 Sand Lake Road interchange. The board was receptive to our concerns and asked additional questions of the FDOT team. FDOT provided additional information, and just for our information, the amendment was ultimately approved. However, it was a split vote. FDOT also expressed that they're going to be addressing their processes internally to make sure that last minute changes like what we saw at our last meeting are to be avoided and can be avoided in the future. All right, so additionally, earlier this month, I served as the chair for the selection committee to review 25 applications for our CAC. The committee included, the selection committee included representatives from Lynx, like Walk Central Florida, the city of Kissimmee, and 2 MetroPlan Orlando staff members. After discussion, we reached consensus on 8 names to recommend to the MetroPlan Orlando board for membership on our CAC. Those members and their seat designations are included in your agenda. The MetroPlan board would take up the recommendations at their March 10th meeting. Marianne will actually have additional comments on that. And then I just have 2 additional updates. Brightline provided an update to the Orange County Board of Commissioners yesterday with information about a joint study with Sunrail, and also discussed their connection to Tampa. It was still lacked a ton of detail, but it was still a really interesting presentation. It's available on ocfl.net, which is the Orange County government's website, on Orange TV. Additionally, there was also a micromobility discussion about what's happening with iDrive. Our MetroPlan Orlando Transportation Disadvantaged Local Coordinating Board gave some input on that. Again, if you would like to see that presentation, it's on Orange TV. All right, and at this time, I'd actually like to recognize Mary Ann for our agenda review.
Good morning, Chairwoman El-Badri, committee members, and everybody who's joining us online. Thank you for working with us as we conduct these virtual meetings. We appreciate your patience and your understanding. Based on direction from our board at their December meeting, this meeting will be held as a virtual workshop in which action items will be reviewed and discussed, but no formal action will be taken so that a quorum is not required. The board's action on these items will be ratified at a future in-person CAC meeting. We do not know when that will be, but again, thank you for your flexibility during this time. As the chairwoman mentioned, we will be using the raise hands feature to recognize committee members during the meeting, call on members of the public during the comment time. If you have joined us on the phone only without the video screen, please use *6 to mute and unmute your line, and then please use *9 to raise your virtual hand so that the meeting host can see you and know that you wish to be recognized. We do have a chat feature on the toolbar. This communicates with panelists throughout the meeting. That includes committee members, staff, and presenters. Please only use this if you have technical issues, need some assistance. A full record of this chat will be included in the public record of this meeting. As Chairwoman El-Badri mentioned, we have recommendations going to the board for 8 MetroPlan Orlando appointee seats to this committee. As the chairwoman mentioned, a copy of the board action fact sheet that will go to the board and the names of the new members are included in your packets. However, after the agendas were complete, I realized I had omitted an important piece of information. I want to be sure to clear that up with you here, and I will amend the information before it goes to the board. Now, you will see on that list of names in your packet that we have recommended 2 people are recommended to the board as non-voting alternates. And as you know, we have 2 people filling those seats right now, Mr. Pigram and Mr. Henley. They are staying with us, but they both requested to change their designations to multimodal advocates. So I did not want you to think that we were losing these members, not at all. I am happy to say that they plan to remain, and we are recommending to the board that both serve out their current terms in the new capacity as multimodal advocates in seats that were open, and then we are recommending 2 people new to the committee to fill those non-voting seats. Thank you to all of you who filled out the board and committee survey, and I am proud to say that the CAC had one of the highest levels of participation. We really appreciate it. This information will go directly into work that's related to our strategic plan. It will help us improve our system. Also, I wanted to let you know for this meeting that our usual FDOT liaison, Rutenia Henson, is not in attendance today. In her place, we have Ms. Anna Taylor, whom you know, from FDOT, and she is our go-to person for any relevant questions that do come up during this meeting. Madam Chairwoman, that completes my announcements this morning. There are no changes to the agenda, and so we would like to take attendance. I will ask Ms. Leilani Vayanga to call the roll, please. Leilani, you are on mute right now.
Thank you. I'll ask all committee members to please go ahead and unmute yourselves now for the roll call. And you can go on mute again after your name is called. Please make sure your video is on if possible so you can confirm that it's you. You'll find the unmute and video buttons on your Zoom screen. Please make sure to say here or present when your name is called. Brady Lassard. Brinley Peters.
Present.
Casmore Shaw.
Present. Present.
Thank you. Cynthia Henry.
Present.
Dan Stevens.
Present.
Edmund Sid. Gigi Mormon. I'm sorry, was that a here? Is Gigi here? Okay. Gregory Eisenberg. Hector Lisa Swine. Jeffrey Campbell.
Present.
Thank you. Joel Davis. Kyle Longville.
Present.
Marissa Salas.
Present.
Nilisa Council.
Present.
Patricia Rumpf.
Present.
RJ Mueller. Russ Hawk. Sarah El Badri. Thea Webster.
Here.
Teresa Mott.
She's on mute.
Okay, I believe Teresa is here. I've marked her present.
Present. Sorry about that. Present.
No, you're fine. Thank you. Tom O'Hanlon.
Here.
Denise White.
Present.
Jeff Pigram.
Present.
Douglas Henley.
Present.
Bruce Detweiler.
Present.
Wonderful. Madam Chairwoman, that completes the roll call.
Thank you so much, Leilani. We will now hear public comments on what we normally call action items. But in this format, it will be items for review or discussion. Do we have any people who want to speak on any of these items? If so, please use the raise hands function on your screen or press *9 on your phone keypad. When we call your name, the host will unmute your microphone. You will see a button pop up that says the host would like to unmute you. Please accept that prompt to activate your microphone. We ask that you provide your name and address for the record. Please hold your comments to 2 minutes or less. Are there any comments at this time? Marianne, do we have either anyone wishing to speak or have provided written comments?
Madam Chairwoman, I do not see any hands raised for public comment, and we did not receive any emails or phone messages for comment.
Thank you, Marianne. So today we have 3 items for review and or discussion. Our first item is going to be a review of the minutes from our January 27th meeting, which are in tab 1 of your agenda packets. I hope you all had an opportunity to read those. If there are any corrections or revisions that need to be brought to staff's attention, please let us know. Otherwise, we can move forward. All right, hearing and seeing none. As a reminder, these are going to be brought back for formal approval in a future meeting. So we're going to move on to our next item, which is a review of the FDOT amendment to fiscal year 2020, 2021 through 2024, 2025 TIP. This is going to be in tab 2 of your agendas. We have Mr. Keith Caskey from MetroPlan Orlando, who's going to present information to us. Please hold your questions until the presentation is completed. Mr. Caskey, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning. We actually have 2 amendment requests this morning. The first one is from DOT District 5, and this includes several projects. There's a grant to Links for transporting adults with disabilities within Osceola County. And then there are 2 railroad crossing projects, one in Winter Garden and one in Lake Mary. And then there's the Quail Pond Circle Bike and Ped Connectivity Project in Castleberry. And then there's a PD&E study for truck parking facilities throughout our region. And you all have the information on that in tab 2 in your packets. So with that, I'll ask if there's any questions.
Mr. Pigram, you're recognized.
Good morning, Keith. Question, these rail safety projects that were on the agenda reminded me that FDOT was awarded a federal grant in October for some capacity improvements in the Sunrail corridor. And I don't think I've seen that come up on a TIP amendment because FDOT said they would match the federal grant. So just wondering if we knew where that was in the TIP program.
I would have to defer to the FDOT staff on that. I have not seen any TIP amendments on that at this point.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Taylor, do you have any additional information on that?
No, that hasn't come up on our TIP report, but I can work with the Sunrail team and figure out if there's any action needed. A TIP amendment would normally require a $2 million and 20% change. So we can identify whether that meets those requirements in order to come to the board's approval.
From what I understand, the federal match or the federal program was 5.6 million, and DOT would match with their own 5.6 million. So just wanted to check on the timing of that.
Yeah, I can look into it. I don't have an answer for that for you today.
Thanks, Ms. Taylor. We appreciate you following up on that. Are there any additional comments or questions on these TIP amendments? I would just like to say it was nice to see some new pedestrian projects come into this TIP, so I appreciate that. And I guess with that, we can move on to our next item, which is a review of the FTE amendment to fiscal year 2020, 2021. Oh, actually, sorry, Keith, I just want to say thank you for your last presentation. So Keith's next item is the review of FTE amendment to fiscal year 2021 through 2024-25. And this is going to be an item for Florida's Turnpike Enterprise. And Mr. Caskey, it is your presentation again.
Right. This Turnpike amendment includes adding infrastructure and equipment for connected vehicles on segments of State Road 528 and also on the Florida Turnpike main line. And again, you all have information on this in your agenda packets. We also have Siasi Fine here from the Turnpike office in case there's any questions on that. So with that, I will open it up and see if anyone has any questions on that project.
Thanks, Mr. Caskey, for that brief presentation. I did have some questions for Mr. Fine, but maybe some other folks have any comments. If you do, please raise your hand. Mr. O'Hanlon, you are recognized, sir.
My question is kind of on the subject, and it really gets down to how are revenue collections for tolls going so far this year?
I don't have any information about that as far as Turnpike collection, but that's something I can get for you.
Well, you've kind of answered the question already by saying it's not atrocious. So I appreciate that part of it, but yeah, if you can get us an update, that would be great.
Will do.
All right, so Mr. Fine, I also noticed, is there any other hand raised? Okay, so Mr. Fine, I had some questions about this amendment, specifically about the connected vehicle improvements that you're going to be making. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So, okay, so this project is for connected vehicle deployment on State Road 528 from I-4 to McCoy Road, and on the Turnpike from just south of State Road 528 to north of State Road 408. And this is in Orange County. This project will deploy roadside units. I believe it's 50 roadside units and other vehicle detection systems. thus providing infrastructure to facilitate communications to and from connected vehicles. Safety enhancements include curve speed warnings, queue warnings, wrong way vehicle detection, and stopped and disabled vehicle warnings. And I also believe that there will be infrastructure available for non-connected vehicles so they can get the same information.
Can you give us an example of some of the connected vehicles that might take advantage of this improvement?
Yeah. So I think for now, it's going to be kind of any vehicles that have that technology built into them, and also our own turnpike vehicles that will be testing the technology. And the roadside units are more sensors than anything. Yeah, that's as much as I know. So it'd be any vehicles connected or disconnected, and our own turnpike vehicles.
Okay, and then one last question. Do you guys have any of these sensors or devices anywhere else on your turnpike system network?
I don't have any information on that, but I could check back with our team to see if we do.
Well, I appreciate your the information you provided today, Mr. Fine. Seeing no other hands raised, we're going to move on to our next item. So we have two presentations today. Please use the raise hands function to be recognized if you want to ask a question. You may raise your hand during the presentation to indicate you want to ask a question, but we're going to hold questions until presentations are completed. If you have audio issues, you can also type your questions into the chat box. And we are going to start today with signal retiming crash impact assessment. We have a presentation from Metroplan Orlando's Laura Bauk to present some results from an impact assessment. Ms. Bauk, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, CAC members. It's lovely to see everyone's smiling faces this morning. I'm here from the future. No, I apologize. This is read February 2021 on this slide, but Lisa, you can go ahead to the next slide. I am here this morning to provide a brief presentation on an analysis that we completed to answer a question that came up at our November TAC and TSMO meeting. And the question was about our signal retiming program, and the questioner wanted to know if signal retiming has an impact on crashes, if it has a beneficial impact on reducing crashes. Next slide, please. Before I dive into the analysis itself and what our findings were, I just want to provide a little sort of primer on the traffic signal retiming program. It's an annual program that Metroplan funds at $1 million minimum per year, where we go in and we retime signals throughout the planning area. We choose the corridor segments that are going to get retimed based on requests that are submitted from our maintaining agencies. And we're supported by 4 different consultant teams that go out and do the analysis and the retimings for us. And generally, the major goals related to what we're trying to do with the signal retiming is to improve efficiency, often end-to-end travel time on a corridor segment, improve safety, and reduce idling time, so we improve air quality and reduce emissions, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. Regarding the analysis that we did, it was a pretty high-level comparison looking at a set of corridors that were retimed from fiscal year 2015 through 2018. And we looked at sort of crash statistics before and after the retiming of those corridors. So the before was crash statistics from 2011, and the after was from 2019. We looked at impacts on total crashes, crashes by severity, so injury versus property damage versus fatality crashes. We looked at differences in crash rates, and then we also looked to see if there was a difference in how signal retiming impacted crashes based on the type of roadway that we were looking at. Next slide, please. So this slide just sort of briefly shows the corridors that were included in that set from 2015 to 2019. You can see they're color coded sort of based on what year they were retimed. There were 109 total corridors included in our set. And the one takeaway you can see from the graphic, there are a couple of corridor segments that were retimed twice within that sort of 4-year period. In general, many of our maintaining agencies retime their corridors on about a 3-year cycle, but that can change just based on if a corridor is doing well, they'll leave it alone. If there have been significant increases in volume or changes in development patterns or traffic patterns, sometimes the signal will be retimed more frequently than that every 3-year mark. Next slide, please. So our findings, on this slide, what we're showing is year by year, how many corridors were retimed, and then looking at 2019 versus 2011, how many corridors showed improvement or fewer crashes for various types of crashes, total crashes, bike ped crashes, and so on and so forth. And our overall takeaway was there were really no statistically valid impacts on the number of crashes that we were seeing or on the crash rates for the overall set of corridors that we looked at. Overall, over time, the crashes and crash rates increased on most of our corridors. There were some corridors that would see, fewer bike ped crashes, but then more injury crashes. There was really only one corridor of the 109 that saw a decrease across all of the metrics that we're showing on this slide. Next slide, please. So when we saw that first set of data, that's when we sort of moved on to looking at the roadway type to see if there were any differences there. And so you can see sort of the different types of roadways that were included in the 109. And we looked at the change in crash rates, the change in total crashes, and so on and so forth. And overall, the crash rates increased, like I said, the total crashes increased across the board. So really no statistically valid impacts that we could see from signal retiming alone. Next slide, please. So I want to say, first of all is not lost. There may be on a corridor by corridor basis some safety benefits that we're seeing from the traffic signal retiming, which I'll get to some of the things that we do specifically during the retiming. But some of the variables that may have moderated the impact of the beneficial impacts of the signal retiming include things like traffic volumes. Over time, those tend to increase, and with increased traffic volumes, you tend to see more crashes. We did not remove corridors that had roadway improvements, like capacity improvements or technology improvements, and that can have an impact. We did not moderate for corridors that had significant changes in development. We just sort of did all of the corridors that were within those 4 years. And another thing that we did not do as part of this high-level analysis was look at changes in crash type to say, well, maybe there was an overall increase in crashes over time, but there were fewer rear-end crashes, that sort of thing. We did not do that this time, but that could be done on a corridor by corridor basis if anyone's interested in any specific corridors. And like I said, we do make some specific adjustments during the retiming that are for safety, things like adjusting the clearance time, adding some additional yellow in some places to reduce red light running. We quite often adjust pedestrian time, specifically near schools and other high pedestrian areas, to give pedestrians a little bit more time. So there are things that we do try to do as part of the retiming that are safety specific. Next slide, please. And then, of course, there are a bunch of other benefits that come from the signal retiming that make this one of our sort of our flagship programs that we do every year. The information on this slide is from our 2019 set of corridors. That was the last set of retimings that we have a before and after study completed for. And for that set of corridors, we saw about 337,000 hours anticipated in travel time savings. And that number assumes sort of 3 years of travel time savings for all of the corridors within that 2019 set, with a present value of $17.8 million, assuming about a little over $18 an hour for the time cost of time. And then you can see the total project costs. That year we had a little bit over $1 million that we were able to put towards the retimings, and our BC ratio for that year was 14.1. Next slide, please. And then this slide shows how our BC ratio or benefit cost ratio has changed over time since we started doing the retimings back in 2010. you'll see that we're still getting pretty good benefit cost numbers. They've been sort of on a steady decline, and we think that's just because we're getting better at what we do. Things are getting more efficient, and there's only so efficient that you can make a corridor segment. And so in addition to those other benefits that I talked about, there's also the fuel savings you can see and the reduced vehicle emissions. These are also both from our 2019 set of corridors. Next slide, please. And finally, some other things that traffic signal retiming can help us do is help coordination with some of our other modes. I talked about what we did with adding some additional pedestrian crossing time in some areas. Another major area where we've done some work to coordinate with other modes is with Sunrail. In some of our areas where we've had major backups due to when trains are coming or leaving, we've been able to retime the signals near those grade crossings to help mitigate that. And next slide, please. That is all I have for you today, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have for me.
Thank you so much, Laura. If you have a question, feel free to ask. You can also raise your hand. I'll actually kick off. So Laura, I actually had some questions about, you guys have brought this to us multiple times and showed us really great improvements that you've been able to do with signal retiming, and you've talked about diminishing returns year over year as you get more efficient. So as this program continues, are you guys going to be changing kind of the goals or how you measure your success? Maybe the safety specific measures are something that you incorporate more into how you choose your signal retiming projects?
That is a great question. And yes, that's something that has come up over actually the last 2 years as we've been picking the corridors. I will say that in general, like I mentioned before, we retime the signals based on the requests from our maintaining agencies. And a lot of the corridors that come up are ones that are either sort of in their pipeline to be retimed or places where they're getting complaints. And I think those tend to sort of rise to the top. But we are encouraging our maintaining agencies as they're submitting to us the corridors that they want to retime to start looking at different things beyond just end-to-end travel time savings, because there's only so efficient we can get, and we do want to focus more on safety. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Mr. O'Hanlon, I see your hand is raised. You are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I think the analysis is difficult to arrive at good conclusions because traffic volumes, without a doubt, went up during that time frame. And the troubling part is if traffic volumes go up 5 or 10%, it gets to a threshold where once you go beyond that amount without retiming, that you wind up with a lot of accidents because the road just doesn't function properly. And I think the results discount the fact that we've got the roads functioning properly to have really reduced the amount of accidents. So I just see it as a very difficult thing to try and do a thorough analysis from year to year because traffic volumes change so much.
I absolutely agree with you. To do this sort of macro analysis, we struggled with it. I think looking at specific corridors, we could give better information, but it would be sort of corridor specific, what our findings are. But you're right, high level, sort of easy or difficult rather to come at a conclusion.
Yeah, but I appreciate the results. Thank you.
Ms. Rump, I see your hand is physically raised. You're recognized. Don't forget. There we go.
Thank you. I was trying to find the chat and raise hand on this thing, but thank you very much. A great presentation, and I got a question, please. I saw early on in the presentation, Laura, there was a map there that showed the different corridors. Can I see more specific details as to the exact intersections? Is that a list of names I can read and look at?
Absolutely, yeah, there is. We can send you a year by year which corridors are retimed and what the endpoints are. Problem.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, and would just to follow up on Ms. Rump's question, Laura, would she email you those specific corridors that she's interested in, or what's the best way to get that information?
Are you asking me that question? Or?
Oh no, sorry, that's for Laura.
Okay.
What's the best way to get the information about?
Oh, I was gonna package up and send it to Marianne so she could email it to Ms. Rump. Yeah. Or I can email
Thank you
to
so
the entire
much.
committee if anyone else is interested.
I'll be happy to send it out to the committee.
Thank you,
Ms.
Mary.
Falk will work it up for me.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Ms. Mott, your hand is raised and you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Laura, great report. I appreciate that presentation. It's always interesting to see year to year the flow of the traffic timing. So thank you for that, that report. Quick question. You mentioned earlier, several areas where the crashes had went down. Can you tell me any contributing factors as to why it went down in terms of was there driver activity, driver patterns, or things of that nature? I'm just curious.
Honestly, at the level the analysis was done, I couldn't say a sort of corridor by corridor, because you would look at one corridor where there would be 7 fewer crashes total, but then there are higher injury. We couldn't see anything statistically significant with regards to what might have been causing the changes.
Okay, thank you.
Not very satisfying, but
thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Campbell, you're recognized.
Just as a follow-up to Ms. Mott's question, was the retiming, the recalibrating consistent all the way through, or did it vary at all?
When you say consistent all the way through, could you be a bit more specific?
Tell us exactly when it was retimed, what took place for the retiming, what went into that?
Well, for each corridor segment that has a retiming requested, basically the consultants will go out, see what the current timings are, do some field observations about what's happening, talk with our contacts at the maintaining agencies about what they're seeing or what complaints they've had. And then they go in and change up the signal timings to add, red or green, or coordinate with other roadways. So it really varies on a corridor by corridor basis, but that's the general flow of how things happen.
That's exactly what I meant. So based upon the corridor, the timing could have been different from one to another.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Was there any noted difference because of that or due to that?
No, not that we saw.
I also kind of have a follow-up to Ms. Mott's question. So I think you mentioned that there was one corridor where there was actually significant crash reduction. Can you remind us what that corridor was? And then are there any observations that you have about that corridor that actually reduced those crashes?
It was Avalon Park and Avalon, let me get the specific name of the roadway for you, just one moment. Avalon Park Boulevard, which was retimed in 2017. And I wouldn't even say there were necessarily a significant number of reduction in crashes, but it was the only one that saw a reduction for all of the different areas that we looked at. There was a reduction in the total crashes, the number of bike ped crashes, but it's like 1 or 2, so I wouldn't say that was necessarily significant. It was just notable that it was the only one where we saw decreases across the board.
Got it.
So I got to follow. How do I raise my hand? Thank you.
It's okay.
Thank you,
I see you.
Thank you. So at that particular intersection, I'm going to follow up on this thing. Was the reduction, what was the change? Was it a longer yellow light, the pedestrian change, or are you following me? Did you extend
with respect
the yellow light?
What the change was for that specific corridor?
Yes, ma'am.
I would have to go into the older timing report and see what was changed. I can maybe put that in the email for you, but I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm just curious. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't see any digital or physical hands raised. So with no more questions for Ms. Falk, I really thank you so much for that presentation and your very true and honest results. We really appreciate that. So we're going to move forward with our next item, which is going to be a presentation from Best Foot Forward. Today we have a guest, which is Ms. Emily Hanna, who's the Executive Director of Bike Walk Central Florida. Ms. Hanna, the floor is yours. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Chairwoman, and good morning, CAC board members. Thank you for having me today to present to you about our Best Foot Forward pedestrian safety program. Before I begin, my name is Emily Hanna. I am the Executive Director of Bike Walk Central Florida, the nonprofit organization that is charged with administering the Best Foot Forward program on behalf of our coalition partners. I am new to this position, so if you do have some questions that are a little historic, I might not be able to answer them. I apologize, but I will get that information to you. I come from the city of Castleberry. I was their development services manager, where I managed the planning, building departments, and the CRA for several years. So I have local government experience, and I'm a planner by trade, so I'm going to present to you on this program from that angle, and I wanted to let you know before I got started. So next slide, please. So I'd like to play a video for you of a friend that everybody knows. His name is Mike Wilson, and he is trying to cross Edgewater Drive at Shady Lane. And he is in a marked crosswalk. And as you can see, no one is yielding to him. And it's a very difficult to do it. No one is moving. And this is with pedestrians and also cyclists, children, and other different types of members of our community. And you enjoy the community. I don't think that anyone's going to enjoy crossing the road here. In this instance, Mike is a little bit more assertive. And then still ignoring that. You can go to the next slide. So I apologize if you weren't able to hear me. That's a very dangerous position for a pedestrian to be in. And at the end of that video, he was assertively showing drivers he was in a crosswalk and that they were supposed to yield to him, and they didn't. And if you noticed in the upper corner of the video, there was an inset of another video, and that's his perspective. And that's very scary to be a pedestrian and having cars speeding past you without yielding and being caught in the middle between two traveling lanes, which is why we are, part of the reason why we are #1 on the Dangerous by Design report, which I'm sure you are all familiar with. We have been #1, or at least in the top 5, since the report came out several years ago. Next slide, please. And so each year, on average, 19 people are struck by drivers each week. This is an average throughout 2015 to 2019. You can go to the next, it's not the next slide, it's another segment of the current slide, but it'll show you that that's equivalent of 2 747 jumbo jets crashing into Central Florida each year. Now, I imagine if that was to actually take place, we would hold those accountable for those crashes. And so I hope that we hold those accountable for the crashes that are occurring and the pedestrian fatalities and injuries on our corridors. And that's hopefully what we're trying to do through the program. Next slide, please. So why are we the most dangerous? Next slide, please. We're the most dangerous for several different reasons, but one, we're somewhat careless. We're careless when we drive. We tend not to pay attention when we're on a 5-lane road with curb and gutter, and we've got the green light. appropriately timed, thank you, Laura, to allow cars to speed down the corridor and not pay attention to the pedestrians that are trying to cross. Additionally, we have pedestrians who aren't necessarily paying attention to where they're crossing the road. They could be on their phones or distracted walking. And then, of course, what I feel is the ultimate is careless design. And I don't necessarily think careless is the appropriate term for this. I think that we've had a goal to move cars as fast as possible throughout our Central Florida community for a long time. And that has proved fatal. And I think we need to redetermine what our goal is in moving people around our community and making it more equitable for those that might not be able to afford to drive. Next slide, please. And so we design our roadways to move cars fast, to get people from point A to point B, and not have any congestion or not have any backups or accidents. And so by doing so, by increasing the speed, we're increasing the rate in which a fatality occurs. At 40 miles per hour, 1 out of 10 survives, whereas at 20 miles per hour, 9 out of 10 survives. So just reducing the speed limit by 20 miles an hour, you could potentially be saving a lot of lives. Next slide, please. And so we also think like drivers, and we often victim blame. And you see this often in news media articles, and what our print and our video media provides is, someone didn't cross in a crosswalk, so it was the pedestrian's fault. Why are pedestrians, they shouldn't be in the roadway. They need to be over on the side. Well, they have to cross. And unfortunately, those conflicts occur. And when people don't pay attention, that's what happens. And so oftentimes we're trying to change how we're blaming pedestrians or cyclists for these injuries and fatalities. A good example, a story that someone told me, a colleague, was a woman in Georgia. She had 3 kids. She was coming home from a birthday party, and she was taking transit. The transit stop, her apartment complex was on the other side of the road. There wasn't a crosswalk for a half a mile. And so she took the 2 children that she could in her hand, and the other one ran in front of her, and was struck and killed by a driver. And she ultimately went to jail because that child was hit and killed. And they blamed her for that child's death. And I don't necessarily agree. We have to design our facilities so that people can get to point A to point B by walking and cycling as well, not just by vehicle. She might not have had the means to drive, but she certainly had the wherewithal to not walk these small children half a block down the road. So we have to be considerate too. Next slide, please. So what are we doing about it? Next slide. So in 2012, when the Dangerous by Design report was released, we realized that we needed to do something about this very serious issue in our community. And we could no longer accept pedestrian fatalities and injuries as inevitable, as a part of how our community is built. And so in 2012, the Orange County and City of Orlando, along with our Metro Plan supporters, started and launched the Best Foot Forward program. It was quickly followed suit with Osceola County in 2017 and Seminole County in 2019. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to tell you today is about what the Best Foot Forward program is. So we are now the largest grassroots organization in the nation working on pedestrian safety, working with local governments, with residents, with neighborhoods, community groups at large to educate drivers, to educate our community that you have to yield to pedestrians in a crosswalk. In addition, you have to walk safely in our community. And then lastly, be an advocate for great design and better street design and street infrastructure. Be an advocate for reducing speed limits. And so we work with our coalition partners, which include all of our county municipalities, the sheriff's department, our public schools, our health departments are a critical part of this. We work with our transit agencies, among many other organizations, to put our best foot forward, pun intended. Next slide, please. And so how are we making an impact? Next slide. There are so many factors that go into changing culture and driving behavior. And one of those is driver yield rates and drivers yielding to pedestrians. And we thought, if we got drivers to yield to pedestrians, then more pedestrians will feel safer in crosswalks and will use crosswalks. Next slide, please. And so we do this by implementing a high visibility enforcement operation. And this is methodology that we use, which has come out of a 2013 NHTSA study out of Gainesville, and also a 1998 FDOT and NHTSA study out of St. Petersburg. And what this outlines is it's a multiple prong approach to how we encourage behavior change. And this includes in engineering, it includes education, and it includes enforcement. And then Best Foot Forward coalition partners and Bike Walk Central Florida evaluate how those three factors hopefully improve the walking conditions and cycling conditions in our community. Next slide, please. And so we do this a couple different ways. One, we start by identifying crosswalks in the community that, that either have issues from our local municipalities have noted, or there's increased pedestrian activity, or it's along a high crash corridor. Additionally, we look at proximity to schools and Lynx transit stops, and also Sunrail. And we try to geographically disperse these crosswalk locations throughout the region and throughout each partner's jurisdictional boundary. But one of the most important factors for our crosswalks is if it's enforceable or not. And enforcing a crosswalk is ensuring that our law enforcement partners can see a violation occur and then be able to pull a driver over to educate them. And sometimes in instances, we don't have necessarily a place to pull people over, or there's a curve in the road. So we might not be able to enforce the crosswalk at that location, but we'll go and enforce another crosswalk, and hopefully that education spills over into some of these crosswalks that we necessarily can't enforce. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that we work with our local government partners is by collecting data, which I'll talk about in a minute, but also by recommending and improving signage and striping within these crosswalks. So we oftentimes work with our partners to recommend low-cost engineering solutions that might give drivers a heads up that there's a pedestrian in a crosswalk, or brighten the crosswalk, make it much more noticeable. And so as we're out in the field collecting data and talking to the community that uses these crosswalks, we often find that we're able to alert a local government that, hey, if you add an RFB here, it might improve your yield rate. Or if you stripe this with a different color or a different pattern, like Shady Lane and Edgewater Drive, it'll stand out and be more noticeable to drivers. Next slide, please. And so this is how we collect our data. We go out with our data collectors, which we hire to basically cross the road and see if drivers yield to them or not. But in order to do that, we have to determine what the dilemma zone is. And that dilemma zone is the distance that a driver would need to stop in order to yield to a pedestrian safely. So we mark off what that distance is. I know it's very difficult to read on the slide, but there are distances based on the speed limit. Hopefully that the driver is going. However, we know that some drivers drive a little faster than the speed limit. So we mark out that dilemma zone, and then we wait for a car to approach the dilemma zone, and our data collector enters the crosswalk, puts their foot in the crosswalk and begins to enter, but is obviously very cautious because oftentimes drivers don't yield. As you can see, a couple of the examples of our yield rates are pretty low. And this is so it would be 8 out of 100 or 4 out of 100 that actually yielded. And so that's a pretty poor yield rate for a crosswalk. Next slide, please. So this is a really good example of how we enforce these crosswalks. We do Operation Best Foot Forward 3 to 4 times a year, where we partner with our law enforcement agencies and we do a high visibility enforcement operation. We bring the media out, we have elected officials there, and we want to educate. We do not want to cite or warn drivers, but obviously that is a part of the education process. So please play the video and you will see how an operation takes place.
School started in some counties, and Orange County kids will head back to school on Monday. For cops, it's the perfect time to make a point about crosswalks and the obligation drivers have when people are crossing the street legally in a crosswalk. WESH 2's Dave McDaniel was on hand as a slew of drivers found out the hard way.
The guy in the blue shirt's a cop trying to make a point.
Silver Honda, northbound, left lane.
By trying to safely cross the street.
Southbound, black Kia, four-door, right lane.
He ended up dodging cars.
You didn't see him? It was pretty obvious.
Operation Best Foot Forward's been in place for a few months. Over 1,600 warnings have been given out to people who did not stop with a person legally in the crosswalk. This was day one for actual tickets.
The way the law reads, once the pedestrian enters the crosswalk, people coming from either direction are obligated to stop, let him cross safely. If they don't stop, they get a $164 reminder.
It's your obligation to stop for that pedestrian as long as he's inside that crosswalk.
This driver thought without flashing lights or a traffic signal, the walker was in the wrong.
First time this ever happens, man. I've lived here for 4 years.
But a few drivers did pay attention, slowing, even stopping.
We need everybody to be on their best behavior and paying attention for the children that will be out and about.
Even in full uniform, Sergeant Goglis had people whiz right on by.
We don't want them to give it gas and see if they can beat the pedestrian. We want them to slow down and be able to stop in time to let the pedestrian safely cross. Southbound, blue Honda SUV, southbound, right lane. Didn't even slow down.
In an hour at only 2 spots, cops wrote 64 tickets. With more cops available, they felt they could have written 100. In Orlando, Orange County, Dave McDaniel, West 2 News.
Next slide, thank you. So as you can see, it's a very dangerous position to be in. Even for a law enforcement officer in full uniform, drivers did not yield to him. But we don't go out and ticket and provide and warn drivers just for that. We go out and educate on the driver yield law. And we do this by inviting the media and drawing attention to our mission, which is to make our streets safer. And so we have a lot of opportunity to get our message out. And it's to know that for every ticket or warning that is given out, with traditional media, it expands our audience and our education to 15,000 individuals. So we really think combining education and enforcement is a great method for increasing driver yield behavior. Next slide, please. But we also do this through social media. We oftentimes share partner updates on roadway improvements, or we go out into the community and discuss other things that are happening, like walk to school day or bike to work day. And we try to promote physical activity out in the community through social media. Next slide, please. We also go out into the community and do outreach. Even during COVID, socially distanced and masked up, we felt it was important to continue our outreach efforts and really reach the vulnerable populations that might not have access to Zoom or internet or these virtual meetings we've been attending. We want to make sure that drivers and pedestrians know that they have to yield, or the pedestrians have to use the crosswalk. So we've still been active even during COVID, ensuring that that message still gets out into the community. Next slide, please. And so to date, the Best Foot Forward program has educated over 10,000 drivers through 484 enforcement details. An enforcement detail is every time an officer or a law enforcement agency goes out and enforces a single crosswalk. So oftentimes we'll do 3 to 4 crosswalks in one enforcement operation. We monitor close to 181 crosswalks. That's actually increased with the bringing in Seminole County into the program. So we're looking upwards of 200 crosswalks that we'll be monitoring in the program. And we've reached out and done 569, now 570, presentations and events to community members throughout the 3-county region. Next slide. And so we track progress over time because we want to show that educating drivers is making an impact. And so in 2013, when the Shady Lane and Edgewater Drive crosswalk entered the Best Foot Forward program, the street was had already received complete street improvements, on-street parking, a bike lane, and significant improvements at crossings. However, it didn't seem to make an impact. We still needed to go out and educate drivers that they needed to yield. And so in 2019, the yield rate is at 70%. And we've kept this crosswalk on our program for monitoring to ensure that we get the crosswalk to, we're never going to get to 100, but in the 90s would be a good goal of ours. Next slide, please. And so how do you put your best foot forward? So we are currently funded by MetroPlan Orlando. So thank you for that support. And also by our county agencies that participate, which is Orange, Osceola, and now Seminole County. And cities like Orlando, St. Cloud, and Castleberry currently fund their participation in the program. We're currently asking smaller municipalities to fund their participation. We were able to do that with the support of MetroPlan Orlando, so thank you for that. And also share your message with colleagues. Tell people that you have to yield to drivers, or if you're in a car with someone and they don't yield, make a note of it and shame them for not doing that. My father recently did not yield to a pedestrian, and I read him the Riot Act, and now he likes to tell me when other drivers don't yield to pedestrians. So I've converted one at least, so I hope to convert more. And then of course, invite us, the Best Foot Forward program and Bike Walk Central Florida, to any presentations or events or anything that's happening in your community. The more we're out in the community, the more that we're able to target audiences and talk about what we're trying to do, the more hopefully we get people to yield to pedestrians. And then of course, support and advocate for complete streets, trail projects, increased signal timing for pedestrians or leading pedestrian intervals, or other types of engineering improvements in your community. Be aware of what's going on at your local level and be an advocate. It's coming from the local government level, and I like to, like I said, give that experience ahead of time, because I really appreciate when the community comes out and supports what we're doing. It's oftentimes we get people that are not in my backyard, or I don't want that, but it's very rare that we get people that support these projects. So please be a voice in your community and support those projects. Next slide, please. But before I leave you, I would like to give you a little update on, or tell you a little bit more about the nonprofit organization, Bike Walk Central Florida. Next slide, please. You've probably heard of us before. We've got a robust board that is very active and engaged in the community. And the board likes to educate, they like to support and encourage different pedestrian, trail, and bicycle safety projects. And then of course, as I said, promote these things and support them at their local level. Next slide, please. And so our two signature programs right now, we're hoping to expand. As I said, I took over the role of executive director in March of 2020, which is a great time to start a new job. So we're trying to expand our programming. But we have the Best Foot Forward pedestrian safety program currently. And then another program that I hope you're familiar with, which is Bike 5 Cities. And this is our advocacy bicycle ride that we do every year to showcase slow streets and trail systems that can get you connected to cities throughout Central Florida. So City of Orlando, Winter Park, Maitland, Eatonville, and Castleberry are the 5 participating cities. And this will be the 5th year that we host this ride, and it is scheduled for October 30th. So we will be kicking off Mobility Week this year, and we hope that you can join us. And I definitely will send Marianne some more information as we plan this event in October. So that is my presentation for this morning. I thank you so much for being here and listening. Thank you for having me, and I will take any questions you might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ms. Hannah. We've had Dr. Dan Stevens with his hand raised. So you are recognized, Dr. Stevens.
Hey, good morning, and thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Good morning, Emily. First of all, I commend you on the wonderful work you're doing there with Bike Walk Central Florida. And not to undermine your efforts, but just to help support, albeit from a different perspective. For example, I noticed that a lot of your stats and everything else pertain to the drivers, the vehicle drivers. And I do realize there's an underlying pedestrian component as well. You know, it's, there are streets for everybody, and so of course, all the law enforcement agencies are out there and they're trying to make a big presence to get that word out. However, counter to that, I actually wrote a 211-page dissertation, The Effects of Electronic Media Messages on the Perceived Self-Efficacy of Pedestrian Commuters, okay? The crux of that argument was that showing these type of enforcement efforts where the cop goes out there or Mike Wilson goes out there and people won't stop for them. In the mind of the pedestrian, it's thought that if cars won't stop for them, I'm certainly not going out there. And I mentioned this because another theory that you mentioned, power numbers. If you go to a major city like, for example, Chicago or New York or whatever, and you've got 50 other people at a crosswalk, there's a level of safety, a sense of safety that you feel. I'm very visible because there's a whole mass of people going across the street. And so with that being said, it's kind of a two-prong approach. First of all, you do have to rein in the drivers and make them more aware, and I certainly support that. The other half of that argument is to not discourage pedestrians. You actually want to encourage those folks to go out there, not in an unsafe environment, but by doing so, you're actually making a safer environment. Second comment before you jump in there is one of the your recommend and install low-cost engineering changes, that slide, and it shows the breakdown of all the various improvements. One thing I've always had a problem with, and maybe the engineers will fight me on this, is the lens color. They always show the amber lens color, which to drivers means slow down. And I'm thinking, if you want drivers to stop, you need to put a red lens up there, not an amber lens. Don't give them the option. It's like, hey, you need to stop. Thoughts? I mean, just curious as to, without putting you on the spot there, Emily, I realize, but just your thoughts on the matters.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Stevens. Those are amazing comments, and I would be happy and interested to read your dissertation paper if you'd like to share that with me.
I'll send it over.
Yeah, thank you. So on your first point, I'm always encouraging for people to walk and bike in their community, but we have to make it not only safe, but we have to make it comfortable. And I don't know if you've noticed lately, but we do a really good job of making a driver feel comfortable in the road, but not necessarily the pedestrian. And I talk a little bit about street equity in that we design roadways with these 5 to 6 lanes, and we give pedestrians a lane, if the sidewalk is 5 feet, then it'll equivalate, to maybe a 10-foot lane. And that's not an equitable transportation system at all. And it's also not comfortable for a pedestrian either. And so I think part of encouraging pedestrians and cyclists to use the facilities is we have to design it so that they want to use the facilities. And I think that's a big shift that is occurring currently. And I am fully taking advantage of it if I can. And I encourage all of you to do the same. On your second note on the low cost engineering, I do agree with you on I'm finding that, for example, the pedestrian hybrid beacon, it flashes red now. It's not a yellow like an RFB, those flash red. And so those do tell pedestrian drivers to stop. And so I think there's some confusion as we come out with these new engineering improvements for pedestrian safety. And there's no real, how do I say it? There's no real red is stop, yellow means go, but in pedestrian world, there's no consistency. And I think we need to develop that consistency, and we're looking at the federal government, hopefully, to do that. I think you know of the potential legislation that was last year, and then I think coming back this year on changing the RFBs to red instead of yellow. I haven't done enough research to know whether or not that's a good or bad thing, but I think that we've educated a culture of drivers to know that red means stop and yellow means slow down or yield or speed in order to get past light. So that you don't, get stuck at the red light. And so I think there needs to be some consistency in that messaging across the board.
Agreed. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Stevens. Mr. Henley, you are recognized.
Good morning, Emily. Great report. I came from Connecticut. Connecticut, we were fortunate to be one of the safest states as it relates to at least bicycling, trail riding. And so when I came down, I was fortunate that we relocated and we moved into the west side of Orlando. We live in Winter Garden, so I could be near the trail. And you make a good point about what the pedestrian or cyclist feels. Only one time that I leave my house to get to the trail, and I had to cross Route 50 out there. And I'm an experienced cyclist, and I'll never do it again. I mean, it was literally 11 lanes, 12 lanes of cars looking at me as I crossed safely. And I just was so afraid of one car darting out, but that's not what I wanted to share with you. So 2 things. if you think about the West Orange Trail, you know, I'm a clicked-in seasoned cyclist, and sometimes I'm so nervous of folks that are out for a beautiful Saturday or Sunday ride. Let's take Killarney Station for an example. That's pretty popular. Everybody knows where Killarney Station is, someplace you could rent bikes. And there's a very dangerous section on Route 455 where the cyclists have to cross. There's no beacon, there's no button to push. This is just going right across Route 455, and they have to take a hard right. So when you cross the street, you actually are crossing a wood bridge, and you cross and take a hard right. And I've seen so many folks being happy about riding and being scared to death about crossing, and it totally changes that. And the cars never yield. It, you know, there's weak stripes on the ground. And I would like to talk to you offline about maybe talking to the Killarney Station folks. I know that they're all privately owned, maybe, and that it's not a bad thing to rent a bicycle on a Saturday morning. So it shouldn't turn into a bad thing if there's an accident, sadly. So some advocacy from the owner or the person who's renting those bikes will be a good thing. Second, anytime I get an opportunity to talk, I always remind folks about, and you said something early about folks who can't afford to drive or don't have the ability to own a car. So my organization, we have a lot of custodians that work in different locations, and they're walking, and some of them are riding to work. And one location I can think of is around the Amway Center. And so we clean the Amway Center, and currently there's a need to provide testing for folks that are working. So everybody is going to Geico Garage and crossing that very busy street. If any of you have been to Amway event, that is a very, very fast throughput. People are coming from downtown Orlando, just ripping across there, and sometimes running the red light. So, you know, I might want to have you guys come talk to our staff, right? So because, you know, there's a lot of walkers from the Paramore area walking to the Amway Center, and they're darting across the street. And so it might be something that we could work together to try to provide some, you know, literature or some education for our own staff.
Absolutely. We would be delighted to do that. And I made a note on the West Orange Trail crossing, just to let you know, Bike Walk Central Florida was invited to be a part of the Healthy West Orange Trails Master Plan. And so we're currently engaged with that plan underway. And I believe some of the cities would like to have the Best Foot Forward program in their city in order to do the driver yield rate and do the enforcement at trail crossings. We often, you know, on the weekends and during some of the evenings, especially as it gets lighter later, we find that the trail activity picks up, and that's also a time when people are commuting home as well. So there's lots of conflict. So we're hoping to get into those communities once the Trails Master Plan is complete. But I will be happy to give you updates on that and speak to you and the other group that rents the bicycles and get into educating whoever we can about yielding to pedestrians and cyclists. So that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yep. I'll reach out to you directly.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Henley. We're going to go to Ms. Patricia Rump first, and then Ms. Cynthia Henry, you'll go next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A great presentation, Emily. Just a few observations as well. You mentioned just recently in a conversation, and I like what you said, the perhaps widening the crosswalk for pedestrians. I noticed on some of the major intersections, it is a wider crosswalk, but when the crosswalk is in the middle of the street, not necessarily in the middle of the street, but it's not at an intersection, but it's along one of the thoroughways, the crosswalk is pretty narrow. So if it was a little wider, I would feel safer, and also get the drivers a little more notice too. So that's a good observation. I'm curious too, you highlighted in your presentation, Edgewater crosswalk. And I'm curious to know that what are some of the other areas or zip codes that are not putting their best foot forward as far as drivers that's being ticketed quite a bit? I would love to know those areas and zip codes that is getting those tickets. And speaking of those tickets, can that money that be used to go toward the Best Foot Forward program, similar to what the sheriff's office, when they seize drugs or seize things, there's a forfeiture seize funds, and they typically put that money back into the community. So somehow or another, can the money be that was came in, the revenue from those tickets on those 4 events be put back into the program to help enhance the program, to make drivers more aware, put the flashing red lights or whatever we can do. And then finally, observation, I noticed the areas that you showed in your presentation that was getting those tickets. I recognized the area, but I also noticed there was no leading way for those crosswalks like you showed in your other presentation, that where the driver was aware that, hey, we approached the crosswalk. There was, like you mentioned, like a leading path there. So that could be enhanced, but a great presentation. Those are my observations, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Those are great observations. So as I mentioned, I took over the Bike Walk Central Florida and the Best Foot Forward program in March of last year. And in doing so, and being a local government, person before, I realized that we make these recommendations, but we don't necessarily time them with local government CIPs. And so that's what I'm trying to do now, is provide a document with these recommendations, signs that lead up to the crosswalk. Maybe some of these crossings could use rapid flashing beacons. Some of these crossings, if they're signalized, could use a leading pedestrian interval to allow the pedestrian to get into the crosswalk before the light for the drivers going parallel turns green. So those right-hand turning drivers, the pedestrians are more visible. Those types of little changes we're putting into a recommendation document and now going to provide the locals. So now they've got something that they can say, this is from Best Foot Forward, instead of just discussing this in our steering committees. And my goal is to try to work this into their CIPs. If they don't have the funding for it, then my goal is to go to MetroPlan and say, these are necessary pedestrian safety improvements that we'd like to see built in the community. Is that something that we can fund? And so I'm trying to streamline that process a little bit better to make those changes occur a little quicker than I think what we've seen in the past. So thank you for those observations. I appreciate that.
Awesome. I love those policy and budget discussions. Ms. Henry and then Ms. Council.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. Emily, that was a very good presentation. A lot of information shared that I was unaware of. I have 2 questions. On one of your slides, you mentioned there are 19 people struck each week. What group, is that for the Tri-County area, or is that for the state or the city? What does that number represent?
That is for the Tri-County region, and that is both injuries and fatalities for Orange, Seminole, and Osceola County averaged out over a year, and how many of those occur per week.
Okay, that's a large number, boy. I had no idea. Also, you keep mentioning RFB. I think I've picked up in context what that means, but what is the RFB? What does that represent?
Sure. So they're called rectangular rapid flashing beacons. And those are the signs on the side that flash when a pedestrian pushes the button. And it's supposed to alert drivers that there's a pedestrian here, look out. It's a way to catch their attention.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Henry, for those questions. Ms. Council?
Hi, good morning, Ms. Hannah. How are you today?
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I truly believe that for me, it's like a godsend, because over this weekend, in coming out from volunteering from a location where it's very near to the courthouse, during the week, it has a lot of police presence. So drivers are more aware and more cautious. But over the weekend, when the courthouse is closed, it's like the world wants to play, and they go 100 miles per hour down this road. And I was talking to a resident that's from that area that comes to the pantry to get help. And they said, this is always like this. We don't know what to do on the weekends. And all we hear are smashes and crashes. Now, Clyde Avenue goes straight across to where the railroad tracks is in Osceola County. So people think that they can go across this neighborhood, but 1 block over is John Young, which is another crazy block in its own way. We have a number of events that are going to be happening, and I would love to invite your organization as well as get information of how do I put one of these rectangular flashing beacons on this block. So during the weekend when there isn't police presence, we still got some presence, something. Thank you.
Absolutely. We will be happy to go out and do presentations. And one of the, so you said Clyde Avenue?
Yes.
Okay. What I'll do is I can look into that and I can contact our Osceola County partners and see if they want to add this crosswalk to be monitored in the Best Foot Forward program, or at least go out and do baseline data. And we will collect that baseline data on the weekend just based on your comments. As we know that obviously police presence does wonders for reducing speed and getting drivers to do the right thing. And oftentimes some of our crossings have lower yield rates on the weekend. So we try to tailor when we collect that data based on when we have that activity or we see those observations occur. So thank you for that information. I will follow up with Osceola County.
The crosswalk would be Bryan Street and Clyde Avenue. So the street that I'm talking about is the same block where 2 Courthouse is. So Monday through Friday, it's a perfect neighborhood. Perfect. Saturday and Sunday is something else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Council. Mr. Campbell, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Hannah, again, that was an excellent presentation and you had all the answers. Just as a follow-up to Ms. Henry's point, 19 is a lot per week. My question really is, you talked about 3 deterrents: engineering, education, and enforcement. In your opinion, what do you think the biggest deterrent is in curbing, or that would curb all of the incidents that's happening?
Sure. From a planner's perspective, I'm going to say engineering. Enforcement is what you do when you don't design a road for the targeted speed. And I know that's a new conversation that FDOT and a lot of our local governments are having about traffic maintenance operations and then obviously roadway improvements. But we've been designing roads that aren't necessarily getting the target speed. For example, Chapman Road in Oviedo was recently widened. That was a 40-mile-an-hour road, is a 2-lane. They've since 5-laned it, 4 2 bidirectional, 1 turning movement lane, medians, and they didn't change the speed limit. And drivers naturally, because the road is wider, are going to go faster. So oftentimes you're finding that they're doing 50, 55 down that road because ultimately, drivers are very intuitive. They're going to listen to the design cues of the road. And if a road is wide, but the speed limit's 35 miles an hour, they're not necessarily going to do that. So I think engineering and designing our roadways for the speed that we want and the context, meaning the land uses that surround that road. And as a planner, it's really difficult in working with the development community. I often find that our policies and our codes require certain siting of buildings and where the parking lots need to go. And in Castleberry, we changed that significantly. But I was running up against an issue with developers that felt unsafe putting that building forward on 436 or 1792. And so we really need to have a better conversation and an understanding of the relationship between the built environment and how we move people, not cars, how we move people. And so I hope that answers your question in a roundabout way.
That did answer a lot of it, but oddly, I live off of Chapman Road. On a regular basis, I try and cross Chapman Road on my bicycle. I know I moved to Chapman Road when it was a quaint 2-lane country road.
Yep.
Like I said, it's now a 5-lane road, and a lot of people are using it as a cut through to get different places. So it has a lot of traffic. And you're right, they did not raise the speed limit. However, they wanted to raise the speed limit. But I was one of the advocates that fought against them raising it because, for example, to turn into our neighborhood, we don't have the approach lane, I guess you might call it, where you would turn out of the traffic to turn in. So we're going from traveling at the regular speed limit to turn in without any way of pulling out of the traffic.
No, okay.
Mm-hmm. But they said it was engineered for a higher speed, but we knew that was potentially a problem.
Yeah.
But again, great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad I chose that road. I used to ride my horse at Brookmore Farms, which is no longer there. So I'm very familiar with that road.
I live about a quaint country road with the sprawling oak trees. They're gone.
They're all gone. Mm-hmm. But thank you for that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Campbell. I don't see any other hands raised, but if anyone does have a question or comment, you can wave. All right, Ms. Henry, is your hand raised?
Yes, just one more question. Thank you so much. Emily, does your organization work with, I guess it's DOT, in designing, what do they call the crosswalks that go across over the road? What do they call those?
Pedestrian bridges.
Bridges, okay. Do you all work with that and help and make recommendations? You know, something like a busy road like 436 in Altamont Springs, or some of those, you know, it would be, I know they have one on 436 in Winter Park, like Katie Way. There's a cross bridge. Do you all work with them on designing those or making recommendations?
We do, and that's a great point to bring up. So as we launched the Best Foot Forward program in Seminole County, and now Seminole County has funded the program, they've identified the Seminole-Wekiva trail crossings at 434 and 436 as crossings to add into the Best Foot Forward program. And we are working with FDOT to do a site visit with the city of Altamont Springs and bring Seminole County partners, including transportation planning, the planning department, the health department, out to have these discussions as to what we can do to cross the road safely. Unfortunately, in certain situations, pedestrian bridges might not be feasible. There might not be the right-of-way, the road width in which to build them, and there might not be enough space. And so at times it might not be feasible, and at times it might be the best thing to do. I often try to steer away from pedestrian bridges over the major thoroughfares, I understand, but over some smaller roads that could have on-street improvements, because you're taking away from the context of the land uses around you. So for example, if you're on a pedestrian bridge on a trail and there's some businesses that might be able to support the trail underneath, you're gonna fly right past them and not be able to support the local economy, especially as the coast-to-coast trail gaps get closed. That specific intersection, I think, is really critical for people using the trail in the coast to coast, and they would need some of those services. So I want to be able to recommend things like that for safety improvements, but also trying to bring the community into those projects as well. But yes, we are a part of those.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hannah, for such a great presentation, and also your responses to our questions and comments. We really appreciate your visit with us today. So with that, we are going to move forward with our meeting and closing. There are several items under general information in tab 5 of your agenda packets, including information about our recommended appointees for the CAC. Our next meeting won't be until April 28th, so we do not have a meeting in March. Our April meeting is planned again as a virtual workshop. So quorum is not required, but as you see, we have a really in-depth conversation, so please join us April 28th. If this changes in terms of virtual workshop format, you will all be notified by Metro Plan Orlando staff. CAC meetings for the rest of 2021 are included in your agendas, and the next Metro Plan Orlando board meeting is March 10th. That is a hybrid meeting, so there will be a quorum in person, but there's also an option to attend virtually. And then we're going to move to member comments. If there are any committee members who would like to speak at this time, please use the raise hands function and you will be recognized. All right, seeing no hands. Oh, okay, Mr. Pickram, you're recognized.
Thank you, Sarah. Just wanted to update the other members of a recent meeting with the Sunrail Commission, and that took place earlier in February, and there was kind of a significant decision made by DOT where originally the contractual agreements for funding Sunrail had the local municipalities taking over the operational and maintenance cost of the system this May of 2021. And this month, DOT has said that will be deferred until the DeLand station is operational as part of the Phase 2 North project to extend Sunrail service north to DeLand. which is targeted to about mid-2024. So in terms of impact to the municipalities we represent, that's about, I think the estimate is somewhere between $40 and $60 million a year that our local municipalities will not be taking over for the next 3 years. So just wanted to provide that update.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that information, Jeff. That is a significant savings for municipalities, especially I think as we figure out the impact of the pandemic on revenues and I think just overall how we're paying for Sunrail in the future. I don't see any other hands raised. All right, folks. So if we're going to move to public comments, if any members of the public wish to comment, please use the raise hand function or dial *9 on your keypad. We'll unmute your mic. After you're recognized, please state your name and address for the record. Keep your comments to under 2 minutes. Marianne, can you let me know if there are any hands raised?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, we do have one hand raised at this time from Mr. John Puhek, and I'm going to press the button here and allow him to speak to us. Mr. Puhek, you should be able to speak now. Mr. Puhek, you'll have to accept that prompt and unmute yourself.
Good. Okay, I enjoyed the presentations, especially in the crash area, serving in the bike ped world previously. I had a couple questions. One of the deaths and injuries, what percentage of those would be at nighttime versus daylight? Do we know roughly?
Great question. I don't have the specifics on that, but I do know generally more of these fatalities occur at night. Crashes, I think, are across the spectrum, but I know fatalities oftentimes more occur at night. But I can get that specific information if you wish.
Yes,
thank you so much,
and that may affect your triangle of priorities of enforcement, education, and all that. A problem that I have, I live in the Dr. Phillips area around Conroy, and going on that road at night, you find people crossing in the middle of the road that with dark clothing that are very difficult to see. And I can see where engineering is great, and I think that's important, as you said, but education of the pedestrians as to what kind of clothing to wear and things like that is important. Also, I was thinking in terms of education, people have to go to the DMV periodically. They have their licenses renewed and that. Consider this. People are sitting, waiting in line for an hour or so. How about if you had a video screen that showed different things of an education standpoint, this just being one? Would that wouldn't be that expensive, but would be an easy way to get Tom, you don't like the idea, but it's just an idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Puhek. We appreciate your comments.
Madam Chairwoman.
Go ahead.
Yes, I do not see any more hands raised, and I do not have any written comments to report. However, two short updates that I'd like to share came to me during the course of the meeting, if I may.
Of course you may.
Of course. I knew you would. First of all, I wanted to talk to the members just a minute and make you aware of something that that we've become aware of here on the staff when we use Zoom, and that is that Zoom is ever evolving, and to stay up to date, you will need to periodically update your Zoom account, even if it's a free account. you can do this when you sign on. You can ask Zoom to check if there are any updates, and it will make the updates for free, and it usually doesn't take long. But I think some of the things that some of our members were citing, buttons have moved on Zoom, and some of the functionalities have changed, and so updating helps keep that all in line so that we're all working on the same Zoom screen. And then also, previously, I was remiss in not bringing up the fact that I had a conversation earlier this week with Mr. Bruce Detweiler from Lynx, and we had asked some questions, Mr. Detweiler, last meeting, and a couple of items that people had asked about to update it. And I think, Mr. Detweiler, are you ready to give us a short update on that? I think you indicated that you were.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Madam Chair and committee members, I just wanted to give you a quick update on some of the questions that were asked last time. One of them was regarding autonomous vehicles. Just to let you know that we do have a consultant that is working on that concept of operations, financial implications, and a preliminary scope of services to do a demonstration. And the plan is for this consulting team, which is WSP, to bring a presentation to all the committees in April of this year. So I'll look forward to having a more in-depth update on this particular project. Additionally, there was a question about our targets that we had identified. The methodology that we used for those targets, we did notice that with the safety targets, one of them was off, and that number was revised. What our safety department did was they had took the totals of the past 4 years, those being 2016 through 2019, and divided them per 100,000 miles of revenue service. And that gave them a target number for that year. And then what they did was they then took that target number and applied it to what our numbers were for this particular year. And all those numbers came lower than what the target was. So those new lower numbers will now be the next target for the following year. So that's it for my update.
Thanks for following up with us, Mr. Detweiler. We really appreciate it. Looking forward to your presentation at our next meeting. Mr. Campbell, I think your comment or question is going to close this out.
Very good. I wanted to be last because I just wanted to say thank you to everyone at MetroPlan and the whole staff for putting together our meetings, and a special thank you publicly to our chairperson, Ms. Sarah Elbalger. You are doing a fantastic job.
I really appreciate that, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you so much. All right, folks. Happy Black History Month. We are closing out today. I think at this time, with no further business, we stand adjourned. Thank you so much. See you all in April.
Thank you.
Bye.